Chapter 53. The ascent to Christ is a struggle through one heresy after another, river-wise, up-country, into a proliferation of sects and sects branching from sects, unto deism, faithless, pretending to be holy, and beyond, ever away from the sea, from the harbour, from all that was serene and certain, into an interior unmapped, a realm of doubt, the nights, the storms and beasts, the falls, the rapids, the America of the soul. Doubt is of the essence of Christ. Of the 12 apostles, most true to him was ever Thomas. Indeed, in the Acta Tomei they are said to be twins. The final pure Christ is pure uncertainty. He is become the central subjunctive fact of a faith that risks everything upon one bodily resurrection. Wouldn't something less doubtable have done? A prophetic dream, a communication with a dead person, some few tatters of evidence to wrap our poor naked spirits against the coldness of a world where mortality and its agents may bully their way wherever they wish to go. The Reverend Wicks Cherrycoke, Undelivered Sermons. She had found in her kitchen, the kitchen garden, the beehives and the well, a joined and finished life, the exact life, perhaps, that our Lord intended she live, a life that was like a flirtation with the day in all its humorless dignity. She was at her window. In afternoon, peaceable autumn, everyone else in town at the venue, Seth too, and the boys, when they came for her, as it seemed only for her. The unimagined dark men, the nakedness of the dark and wild men. Water in a kettle somewhere was crackling into its first roll. She risked looking at their faces. The only other place to look was down at the secret flesh, glistening, partly hidden, partly glimpsed behind the creased and odorous deerskin clouts. Yet for them to come for her, this far east of Susquehanna, this far inside the perimeter of peaceable life, was for the day to collapse into the past, into darker times. 'Twas to be returned to and obliged to live through again, something she thought all her community had transcended. Her lapse had been to ignore the surprising frailness of secular life. By imagining it to be Christian, she had meant to colour it with the immortality of her soul in Christ, allowing herself to forget that turns of fortune in the given world might depend upon events too far out of her power. What twig fall, praise escape, unintended insult might have grown, have multiplied, until there was nowhere else for them to have come, no one else to have come for, even still as she was, and spiritless before that violent effect of causes unknown. The further they took her through the forest, away from her home and name, the safer she began to feel. Sure, they would have killed her back there on the spot, if that's why they came. They were moving in a body, yet more slowly than they might have travelled without her. Not at all angry or cruel. Like a dream just before the animals wake up, the German farms passed flowing by. The towns, Equinox, New Cunner, Burger's Forge, until one morning, loud as the sea, stirred to apple cider turbulence from the rain, Susquehanna. How had they avoided the eyes of all the townsfolk and farmers between, the gentry out riding, the servants in the fields? How had her party found darkness and safety amid the busy white densities? And now they'd come to it, how did they mean to cross the river? There were boats waiting. At the time, she didn't find that as curious as their origins, for they were not Indian canoes, but French-built bateaux, framed in timbers, she was later to learn, that grow only in the far Illinois. And they crossed then, as simply as the thought of a distant child or husband might cross the zenith of a long day. She knew the instant they had passed the exact centre line of the river. As she stepped to the western shore, she felt she had made herself naked at last, for all of them, but secretly for herself. Over the blue mountain, over Juniata, up into Six Nations country, into the roll of great earth waves ever northward, the billowing of the forests, in short cycle repetition overset upon the longer swells of the mountain. A population unnumbered of chestnuts, maples, locusts, sweet gums, sycamores, birches, in full green abandon. The songbirds went about their lives. The deer fell to silent arrows. The sound of Sunday hymns came from a distant clearing, then passed. The days went unscrolling. The only thing she was called on to do was go where they went. They did not bind or abuse, or, unless they must, speak to her. They were her express. She was their message. Northing, almost as she watches, trees one after another, sometimes entire long hillsides of them go flaring into slow, chill combustion. Sunsets the colours of that hearth she may never see again. Too often find her out, unprotected. Early snowflakes are appearing. Enormous flights of ducks and geese and pigeons darken the sky. The terrible massed beat of their wings is the roar of some great engine above. 'Tis withal a snowy owl year. The lemmings having suicided in the north, the owls are obliged to come further south in search of food. And suddenly white visitors from afar are everywhere, arriving in a state of mistrustful fatigue, going about with that perpetual frown that distinguishes them from the more amiably befizzed white gerfalcons. At the peaks of barns, the tops of girdled grey trees, gleaners of voles soaring above the harvested acres, with none of your ghostly hoo neither, but low, embittered croaking, uttered in syllables often at the verge of human speech. The winds are turning meantimes ever colder, the leaves beginning to curl in and darken and fall. One day, having brought her to the shore of some vast body of water that vanishes at the horizon, they tell her she must get into a bark canoe. And for the first time, she is afraid, imagining them all rowing out together into this yellow splendour, these painted indigo and salmon cloud formations, toward some miraculous land at the other side of what, even with a mild chop, would soon have battered the frail craft to pieces. Instead, keeping the shore ever in view, they continue north, till they enter a great river filled with a traffic of canoes and bateaux and barges, with settlements upon the banks, smoke ascending everywhere, white faces upon the shore, and a town and another. For many weeks now she has neglected to pray. She has eaten animals she didn't know existed, small, poor things, too trusting to avoid the snares set for them. Her captors have told her when and where she may perform every single action of her life. It is schooling, though she will not discover this till later. When they arrive at last in Quebec, the river is well upon them. Though not as grand as its counterpart in Rome, yet in Quebec the Jesuit college is palace enough. Travellers have described it as ascending 3 stories with a garret above, enclosing a broad central courtyard, though were she asked to confirm even this, she could swear to nothing. Perhaps there are more levels. Perhaps there is a courtyard within a courtyard, or beneath it. Perhaps a crypto-porticus, or several, leading to other buildings and parts of the city quite removed. Her arrival here passes too quickly for her to take much of it in, so deep in the night, in the snow, with the black needle of the torches for her first incense, their light sending shadows lunging from corners and crevices and window reveals, the distant choiring like tuned shouts, the open looks of the men. At dawn, separate, she is taken into the refectory, where at each of the 100 places upon the bare tables is set an identical glazed earthen bowl of raspberries, perfectly ripe, though outside be all the dead of winter, and upon each table a jug of cream fresh from the shed. An old Indian serving man, who moves as if wounded long ago, showing not a trace of curiosity, brings in a kettle of porridge. She is not to have raspberries. She thanks the Lord, for who knows what unholy power might account for this unseasonable presence in its unnatural redness. The courtyard produces a constant echoing whisper that can be heard everywhere in the great residence. Every skin seems immediate to every other. Into the morning, scribes carry ink pots and quills and quill sharpeners, in and out of cells of many sizes, whose austerities are ever compromised by concessions to the rococo. Boys in painted hoods go mutely up and down with buckets of water and kindling. Cooks already have begun to quarrel over details of the noon meal. In his rooftop bureau, an astronomer finishes his night's reductions, writes down his last entries, and seeks his mat. Vigil keepers meanwhile arise and limp down to the ingenious college coffee machine, whose self-igniting roaster has, hours earlier, come on by means of a French clockwork device which, the beans having been roasted for the desired time, then controls their transfer to a certain engine where they are milled to a coarse powder, discharged into an infusing chamber, combined with water heated exactly, eka koffia. She is taken, barefoot, still in Indian dress, into a room filled with books. Prêtre de la Tube, a Jesuit in a violet cassock, speaks to her with a thick French accent and will not look at her face. Nearby, in smoothly kept silence, sits a colleague whose relentless smile and brightness of eye only the mad may know. Our guest, the Frenchman tells her, is a world-known philosopher of Spain, having ever taken interest in heretic women who turn to Holy Mother, the Church. His observations upon your own case will, of course, be most welcome. So silently that she jumps. Another man now, slighter and younger, in black silk jacket and trousers, has appeared in the room. When she makes out his face, she cannot reclaim her stare. As a small current of deference flows between the two Jesuits, the Spanish visitor takes from the messenger a tightly folded sheet of paper sealed with wax and chops in two of the colours of blood. The messenger withdraws. She watches for as long as she can. Have you never before seen a Chinese child? She has assisted at more than one birth, has endured a hard drinking and quarrelsome troop of menfolk. Who is this unfamilied man in a frock to call her child? She replies, "No, sir," in her smallest voice. "You must call me father. There'll be more than one Chinese here. You must learn to keep your eyes down." The college in Quebec is headquarters for all operations in North America. Kite wires and balloon cables rise into clouds, recede into aerial distances as, somewhere invisible, the Jesuit telegraphy goes ahead, unabated. Sealed carriages rumble in and out of the porte cochere. Horsemen come and go at all hours. Whenever the northern aurora may appear in the sky, rooftops in an instant are aswarm with figures in black, certain of the crew seeming to glide like swifts ever in motion, others remaining still as statuary, the celestial flickering striking high lights upon the pale damp faces. Rumours suggest that the priests are using the boreal phenomenon to send messages over the top of the world to receiving stations in the opposite hemisphere. 26 letters, 9 digits, blank space for 0, a sergeant's voice instructing a platoon of novices. That suggest anything to any of you hammerheads? An array 7 by 5 of think, nitwits, think, lights. Behold, ye milling sheep. He swings a lever. Above, against a grey deck of snow clouds, a gigantic latticework of bright and very yellow lights appears, 5 across by 7 down. Briskly stepping along ranks and files of smaller handles of ebony, he spells out the sequence IDIOTS in the sky above their gaping faces. Visible for hundreds of miles, everyone beneath who can spell now knows everything there is to know about you. But it's not all spectacle, all romance of electricity, no. There's insanely boring drudgery aplenty too, mes enfants. For you're all to be sailors upon dry land. Explaining that, as the whole apparatus must stand absolutely still in the sky before weather's unpredictable, it requires an extensive rigging, even more mysteriously complex than that of a naval ship. Lines must ever be shifted, individual winches adjust constantly the tension and stays and backstays and preventers, as the changing conditions aloft are signalled by an electrical telegraph to those below. A coordinator in a single-breasted soutane or cassock of black Bruges velvet and lined with wolverine fur stands upon a small podium before the set of ebony handles and indicators trimmed in brass, whilst Chinese attend to the rigging and specially trained Indian converts tend a peat fire so as to raise precisely the temperature of a great green prism of Brazilian tourmaline, a snarl as Medusa with plated copper cabling running from it in all directions, bearing the pyroelectrical fluid by which everything here is animated. More intense than the peat smoke, the smell of ozone prevails here, the musk of an unfamiliar beast, unsettling even to those who breathe it every day. In that harsh sexual smell, in the ice-edged morning, she is led past them. Northern winds beneath her deerskin shift, itching to risk raising her eyes, just once, to see who'll be watching. Do you think she understands? The visitor asks in rapid French. The other shrugs. She will understand what she needs to, if she seeks more. The two exchange a look whose pitiless weight she feels clearly enough. Men strain at cables that pitch steeply into the sky, the enormous rooftops anxiously ascurry, as before some invisible approach. Chinese seem to flit everywhere. Voices, usually kept low, are now and then raised. He has her arm. The other priest is behind them. She could not break free. Could she? Reaching with her arms, run to the roof's edge and into the air, upborne by friendly presences, as by brilliance of will, away across the roof slates and fortifications, wheeling, beyond the range of all weapons, beyond the need for any obedience. The sun coming through, the river shining below, the great warrior's river, keeping her course ever southwestward. Nor might any left behind on the ground see her again. Would they? Passing above in the sky, the sleeves of her garment now catching light like wings, her mind no more than that of a kite, the wind blowing through. Careful, her head. She is upon her back. Rain is falling lightly. A Chinese is squatting beside her, holding her forearm and talking to another Chinese who is making notes in a small, ingeniously waterproofed book. 'Tis he, the same man she saw in the Jesuit's chamber. He smiles, or 'tis something in his face she sees and fancies a smile. God protect us, P. de la Tube is saying, from all these damnable fainting novices, day after day. It never ends. The guests' ears seem to move. And yet, how many of us, posted upon missions more solitary, might find the event intriguing, and your situation here a paradise of charming catalepsies and wonder, his manner bordering upon the strained, whatever you had to complain of. Ah, of course, this isn't like the field, is it, Father, where occasions of sin are so seldom met with? No, here are rather opportunities without number, none of which may, of course, be acted upon. Wouldn't that depend, baring his teeth in a smile, upon whether she is to be a bride of Christ or stand in some other connection? As he hesitates, as if for permission. His widow, a novice in las vidas de Cristo. Here the Spaniard kisses the crucifix of his rosary and pretends to pray a moment for the success of the sisterhood. Have your Indians collected you enough of these white roses that you might spare one? Of course, if you have a particular interest in this one. No, who? I? Not at all. In fact, fingering the buttons down the front of his costume like beads of a rosary. I would settle for another. But we wouldn't hear of it, Father. Las Vuedas must have her, no question. I shall do my best to speed the request up through hierarchy. How very generous. I go to mention you in my next report. The other inclines his head. She understands that she has been bargained for, having remained all the while upon her knees, disobediently gazing up at the men, waiting as long as possible to see which may be first to notice. Sister Blondel is a gypsy, a child of the sun, whom men kept mistaking for the very type of the British doxy, blousy and cheeky as any who's ever delighted us in story or upon the stage. For a while, indeed, she worked as a Covent Garden sprite, finding herself in the company of every sort of man imaginable and not so, from quivering neophyte to depraved old coot. It did not take her long to accumulate a great spoil heap of mistrust for the breeched sex. Soldiers like ramrods and sailors like spars, mechanics and nabobs and gents behind bars, girls, there's no sort of fellow I've ever passed by, not even those coolies out there in Shanghai. 'Tis men have the sterling and sixpences too, so beware there's men and 'tis mealtime for you. Mind the equipment as long as you can, and don't sell yourself cheap to some cheese-paring man. Ever since Adam stepped out of Eve's sight and didn't get back till the following night, men have been lying to women they bed, carefree as felons, yet easy to shed, singing, men have the sterling and sixpences too, so beware there's men and 'tis meal time for you. Mind the equipment as long as you can, and don't sell yourself cheap to some cheese-paring man. She is accompanied by a couple of sisters in close, yet for those days advanced, harmonies. Beneath what seems but a tap-room jig lies the same sequence of chords to be found in many a popular Protestant hymn. Though I was not present in the usual sense, nevertheless, I am a clergyman, be confident. 'Twas an utterly original moment musical, as they say in France. Then, as Blondel relates it, just as I was about to give up men, I discovered Jesuits. It was like finding Christ at last, a bolt of desire, to find herself at last beyond desire. Yet not like renouncing anything. No, I loved the streets, love 'em ever. The excitement, the tail-a-minute scurrying, even the bullies, and despite the pox. Girls stricken overnight, beauty gone, sure, life's a gamble, just a day and night pass bank, isn't it? Why not look your best whilst the dice yet tumbles, how I see it, don't you? She attends to her hair. Well, would you like me to fetch a mirror, is what I mean. Oh, for the first time since she was taken, her voice stirs. She tries to smile, but finds herself short of breath. What must I look like? Whispering. Not quite ready for the ridotto, are you? Says Sister Grinchaus with some solemnity. These are from berry vines, the quiet and dewy Sister Crozier, examining the scratches upon her body closely. She nods. No marks from the Indians, if that's what you mean. They were uncommonly gentle with me, although Sister Grinchaus's eyes sparkle like jasper. Must we guess, then? I stared often at the many ways they had inscribed their own skins, some of the pictures being most beautiful, others arousing in me strange flashes of fear mixed with, it perplexes me to say, ow! Speak up! With feelings of desire. She sets her chin provocatively and gazes at them. Oh dear! Just from a couple of tattoos? Well, well, girls, whatever are we to do? 'Twill be the chillis for you. Chillis? For you, I'm afraid, my dear. And there's the first lesson already. Never discuss desire. Get that one sorted out. You'll be a good Catholic in no time. But you bade me. Shh! Here it is. Here is what disobedient novices must wear. The Las Vedas chillis is a device suggested by Jesuit practice, worn secretly, impossible, once secured, to remove, producing what some call discomfort, enough to keep thoughts from straying far from God. If God were younger, more presentable, murmurs Crozier, we'd be thinking about him all the time and we shouldn't need this. her gaze inclining to the hothouse rose, a deep red, nearly black, whose long, supple stem is expertly twisted into a breechclout to pass between the labia as well as round the waist with the blossom, preferably one just about to open, resting behind, in that charming cusp of moistness and heat, where odours of the body and the rose may mingle with a few drops of blood from the tiny green thorns, and flashes of pain whose true painfulness must be left for the penitent to assess. Of course, this is all for the purpose of keeping her attention unwaveringly upon Christ. Considering what Christ had to go through, Jesuits are all too happy to point out, it isn't really much to complain about. Sister Grinchaus stands behind her, gripping her by the arms. "It could have been worse," whispers little Sister Cruzier. "Not all Indians are so honourable." She kneels at the captive's feet, holding the device, her fingertips already pricked and reddened, and cannot keep from directing wide-eyed glances upward. "All right, dear," nods Sister Blondel. "Step right in and mind those long limbs." She should be objecting, loudly if she must, but when has she ever done so before? And to offences, it now seems to her far more grave than this. Instead, her bare feet go creeping, one after the other, like docile birds, toward the waiting trap of the chilice, and then each, lifting, fluttering, passes into the realm of thorns. Later, they give her soothing gums to rub into the tiny wounds. The odour rises as the rubbing goes on, a single church-like odour of incense, ungrounded by candle wax or human occupancy, meant for heaven, a fume rising in transmutation. She is shorn of all hair, from head to crux. "You must begin," they advise her, "absolutely naked. If you are good, if you learn what you are taught, you may someday be allowed a wig, a child's wig, of course, perhaps a boy's. You look enough like one now." "Farm work, madam." "Ah, don't be insolent." Having already seen other sisters going about in elaborate wigs that she imagines must be quite in the current Parisian mode, she is soon wondering how she might look in one of these powdered confections. One night she sneaks into the room where, ranked upon shelf after shelf, all the wigs are kept, each upon its elegant wig stand made of a strangely shaded ivory. Mischievously she idles away one cat hour and then another, prowling, peering, crouching, hardly daring to touch the white bevorticed objects, each more desired than the last. When she does at length reach forward, take one to her breast, slip it onto her own shaven pate, and only then think of finding a mirror, and then some light to see by, she is flanked in the instant by strong presences, whose faces she slowly recognizes in the dark as those of Blondel and Crozier. Took her time about it, I must say. Sooner or later, they all do it. Mistress Piety hears, as vain as any Portsmouth whore, yet prettier than most, whispers Crozier. She blushes as they remove the wig in the near dark, and she supposes, with a private frown, she'll never see it again. Her eyes follow it back to its wig stand, which, she notices for the first time, with a chill, is directing at her a socketed stare. She recognizes it belatedly as a human skull. Resolved never again to be called a fainting novice, she looks about. Yes, every gay elaboration in the room rests upon a staring skull. She lets out her breath in a great sigh and refrains from fainting. The model, the wolf of Jesus, addressing a room full of students, is imprisonment. Walls are to be the future. Unlike those of the Antichrist Chinese, these will follow right lines. The world grows restless. Faith is no longer willingly bestowed upon authority, either religious or secular. What pity! If we may not have love, we will accept consent. If we may not obtain consent, we will build walls. As a wall projected upon the earth's surface becomes a right line, so shall we find that we may shape with arrangements of such lines all we may need, be it in a crofter's hut or a great mother city. Rules of precedence, routes of approach, lines of sight, flows of power. Hold, hold, objects an auditor. Is this not to embrace the very ortholatry of the Roman Empire, that depraved worship of right lines, intersecting at right angles, which at last reduced to the brute simplicity of the cross upon Calvary? Padre, Padre, which Rome is it again that Jesuits are sworn to? A grim smile. What injury that we are not in Spain. He is no longer surprised at impiety or disrespect, having found them only too prevalent upon this side of the ocean. Yet there remains little choice. Too much of Europe is unsafe now for any Jesuit. America is perplexing. Though all the world's expelled and homeless be welcome here, no true soldier of Christ could ever find easy refuge among these people, for whom heresies flow like blood in the bloodstream, keeping them at the work of their day as blood might keep others warm. Yet heresy loses its force in these provinces, this far west, with sects nearly as numerous as settlers. To pursue through the American quotidian every act of impiety he might find would be to fight upon more flanks than any could reckon. Where would time remain for la obra? Perhaps there is no disjunction, he has nonetheless continued. And men, after all, want Rome, want her, desire her as both empire and church. Perhaps they seek a way back to the single realm, as it was before Protestants and Protestant dissent, and the mindless breeding of sect upon sect. A portrayal in the earthly daylight of the soul's nostalgia for that undifferentiated condition before light and dark, earth and sky, man and woman, a return to that holy silence which the Word broke, and the multiplexity of matter has ever since kept hidden before all but a few resolute explorers. Hold, hold! Is it a Chinese motif we begin to hear? An entire room full of students transferred here from the University of Hell. If Chinese feng shui be forbidden, how may we study such metaphysics as this without risk of reprimand? The risk is not so much to your backside as to your soul. Can any tell me, why must we fight this abhorrent magic? A ripple of giggling. Puis entonces? I was a student once too. I remember passing around the same withered packets of paper you have been reading in secret, now unfolded and refolded 100 times, secrets of the Chinese wizards. Aha! Even to the name. Some of you are learning how to paint the symbols, perhaps even beginning to experiment with combining them in certain ways. I know, fellows, I know everything that passes here. Another of the 1,000 or so wonderful things about the sacrament of penance is its utility in group situations like yours. Someone always confesses, or in plain Spanish, simple el guion derrama las Judias. Always someone spills the beans. What's he saying? Something about scattering the Jewesses? Now 'tis Kabbalism. In a moment he'll be rattling in ancient Hebrew, and perhaps we ought to have a plan. For subduing him, you mean? Actually, I meant a plan for getting out of the room. Why prevent the Chinese from practicing feng shui? Because it works, the wolf of Jesus is explaining. How then? If it works, should we not be studying it? It carries the mark of the adversary. It is too easy, not earned. Too little of the load is borne by the practitioner. Too much by some force invisible, and the unknown price it must exact. What do you imagine those to be that must ever remain so unreferred and unreferable to Jesus Christ? And as his soldiers, how can we ever permit that? 'Twas an earlier, simpler time, children, when many grew quite exercised indeed over questions of doctrine. There is deep, throat-snarling hatred, for example, as the wolf of Jesus instructs them. The Christless must understand that their lives are to be spent in servitude, if not to us, then to Christians even less godly, the kings, the enterprisers, the adventurers chartered and piratical. What of those we may convert? The priest makes a dismissive gesture, his knuckles flashing pale in the candlelight. Conversion is no guarantee of a Christly life. Jews are converted. Savages, English wives, Chinese, what matter? Once converted, all then revert. Each one, at the end of the day, is found somewhere, often out in the open, among ancient stones, repeating without true faith the same vile rituals. And where is he? Where are his forgiveness, his miracles. He is upon his knees in apparent consultation. The students, after a while, begin to whisper together, and soon the place is chattier than a coffee house. The Spanish visitor continues apart. End of chapter.